Today on episode 86, I have an in-depth conversation with math educator Robert Kaplinsky, and we discuss the intricacies of teaching such an important but divisive subject. And yes, pun intended. Math tends to be one of those subjects that kids either understand and love or are completely befuddled with and hate. Robert lets us in on why Common Core was given such a bad rap, the concept of open middle math, and if you're a math teacher who hasn't heard of it, you're in for a treat. And then we both get into the complicated discussion of grading. So much covered here that even if you're not a math teacher, you'll see parallels in what you do in the classroom.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lepre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lepre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Hey, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me today. I love that you keep coming back week after week. I have to tell you that I was a little bit nervous about today's episode because talking about math is not something that I'm comfortable with. But after my chat with Robert, I can see that we have a lot of similar struggles with our respective subject areas. But first, I wanted to give you more information about the upcoming new Educator Conference in San Diego. So I haven't mentioned this before, but the registration fee is only $49 if you're a California Teachers Association member and $10 for student CTA members. Can you believe that? I have never ever attended a conference that was so inexpensive. Your fee gets you the conference session, Friday dinner, Saturday breakfast and lunch, and Sunday brunch. Seriously, guys, $49, a steal. And if you go, you can earn up to 2 units of university credit from the California State University Chico Department of Ed for just $60 a unit, and up to 15 hours of professional growth credit available at no cost if you're a CTA member. So again, such a steal. And I know you guys that you need those credits so that you can move up on the pay scale. So this is a really easy way to do that. And then I just found out that I don't know if you've heard of him, Nicholas Ferroni, he was named one of the most influential educators in America and one of the 100 making a difference. He's going to be the keynote speaker on Saturday. He's definitely a sought-after expert on nationally known platforms, including ABC's The View, MSNBC, The Huffington Post, and more. I'm a big fan of keynotes that get me pumped up, and I've seen him on TV and can tell you that he's really inspiring. So the deadline for booking your hotel at the discounted rate for the new Educator Weekend South here in San Diego is Thursday, November 21, 2019. You want to jump on that. So be sure to head over to teachersneedteachers.com/conference to sign up for the San Diego conference on December 6th through the 8th.
Hi, this is Kim Polishuk
and Jen Giffen, hosts of Shooks and Giff, the podcast,
a proud member of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to right now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual host.
Be sure to check out all of our other great podcasts by visiting edupodcastnetwork.com.
And get ready, because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Robert Kaplinsky has worked in education since 2003 as a classroom teacher, teacher specialist for the Downey Unified School District in California, instructor for the University of California, LA, and presenter at conferences around the world. He's the president of Grassroots Workshops, a co-founder of the website openmiddle.com, and he created the hashtag #ObserveMe movement. Now that you know more about Robert, here's our conversation. Well, thank you, Robert, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much.
Now, just out of curiosity, because this was not my favorite subject in high school, what made you decide to teach math?
You know, that's a really funny story. In college, I wound up being a math major at UCLA. I never intended to be a math major. I intended to be a computer science major because this was around like the late 90s or early 2000 when like everyone was going to be a millionaire programmer. And you needed to take math and like some other classes just to be a computer science major. So I was taking those, and I got to a point where I was like, I'm kind of almost done with a math major. Why don't I just like stick with that? And so that's really kind of how I got my math degree. I became a programmer after college. And then the whole .com collapse happened and I was unemployed for a year. I then had a friend who was needing a chaperone to go with her students to the LA Zoo. I was that chaperone. And on the bus, the person said, have you ever thought about teaching math? And I was like, no, not really. I mean, I kind of maybe. And from that chaperoning, I wound up getting a request to do a job interview, and I was unemployed, so I really had no other option. And I applied, I interviewed, and I got accepted, and I sort of just became a math teacher because I was unemployed for a year, and I had no other options. But now I can't. I mean, it's just so funny how your life ends up in certain spots. I'm so glad I did, but it started as an accident.
Oh, wow. Very serendipitous there.
Yeah.
And did you have to like get your emergency credential for that then?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really had no business being a teacher. This is again 2003 now. And so California was in a teacher shortage. So they offered an emergency credential. I had never taken an education class. I had never done a minute of student teaching. I think the only thing that qualified me was that I had a math degree and I passed like the entry level kind of subject matter test.
Yeah, that must have been easy for you.
Well, that's a different subject. Yeah, the CSAT in California for math is ridiculous, but that's a different story.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly, I really was a pretty awful teacher at first. I was just lecturing and doing some of the same kinds of things that happened to me as a kid where I could do math, but I didn't really understand what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I was just creating more math robots. So it was a tumultuous start, but I mean, it gives me a lot of perspective of kind of where new teachers struggle and where, just what it's like to be a teacher in your first years.
Well, and that's a great segue to my next question, because my audience, they are new teachers. So what have you seen as new math teachers' biggest struggles content-wise?
I think that in general, we as a society, and really the society could be as broad as you want to make it, whether it's international or national to any one country, but what does it mean to be good at math? And what does it mean to understand math? And I think that we've got this disconnect from like the person who can calculate quickly is good at math, but is a person who understands math and maybe doesn't calculate quickly good at math. I think that the reality is that we're in the shift where we are expected to teach math in ways that no one ever taught us. And that's really hard because at best, maybe you saw a little bit of it in your pre-service classes, but it's pretty challenging. I mean, a lot of the time you've got a lot of people go into teaching math because they don't want to have the same kinds of teachers they had growing up. So it's a challenge. I would say just knowing all the stuff you have to teach well enough to actually teach it in a meaningful and conceptual way.
And I can imagine, because I would help my daughter with her math, just knowing how to break it down, because I can do it. I can solve it. But then the why of each step of solving it, that was really tough for me. And so, I've met a lot of math teachers who are really smart with math, but they don't necessarily know how to break it down from, say, a 6th grader's point of view or a 7th grader's point of view. They lack, I don't know if you want to say the empathy to understand, what the gaps in knowledge are.
Yeah, I think the empathy is right. I mean, what I mean is that if you were really successful as a student in math your whole life, it's really hard to understand, like, why do these kids not get it? And if you struggled, you're like, oh, I freaking totally get it. If you're listening right now and you're thinking, what does he mean? Like, how could you not understand how math works? I'll give you some examples.
Okay.
Let's start with dividing fractions. Like, you might know that when you divide fractions, you change it to multiplication and use the reciprocal. Some people call it invert and multiply. Mm-hmm. Why does that work? Like I remember someone asking me, and I was after college, I had a bachelor's of math, and I'm like, is there even a reason? Like it never even occurred to me. And I just thought you just do it. And when I realized like I didn't know, I kind of went through denial. Like, does it even matter? And what does that mean if I don't know? Do I really even understand this? When you multiply, are you really bringing down a zero? Like, what does that zero come from? When you're subtracting, are you really borrowing a 1 or is it like a 10? If you're using the logarithm rules, like where the hell did those come from? Like I remember I could use them. I could solve problems with them. I had no idea where they came from. And like, how deep is my understanding if I only know some parts of math? And so I just want to point it out that like, you're not alone. Like everyone wants to, like no one's really comfortable saying it out loud, but I'm going to say it like everyone has things they don't understand as well as they'd like, but because no one's really very few people feel comfortable saying it, it really makes it hard to move forward because you might be able to help, one teacher with something and they could help you. But if there's not that safety of being able to admit what we're struggling with, it's just really hard.
Right. And it's a lot of rule following. Like I could remember all the different rules for doing this and that. To me, it didn't really matter why. I just, if you did it, you got the right answer. But then if I forgot that particular rule or formula, I'd be screwed because I didn't understand why I had to use that in the first place. So I couldn't come up with another way of doing it or kind of reason my way back to that formula.
Yeah, and I think that you're really hitting on this, and I think that we're going through somewhat of an identity crisis, but we don't realize it. And like, here's what I mean. And in 50 years, in 100 years, in 500 years, should we be still teaching the same math standards? And when I ask that question to people, I get really interesting answers. Some people are like, of course, math is math. But then you start like breaking it down. Like, for example, we teach kids how to use coins. I don't know. I mean, are we going to be using coins in 500 years? What about analog clocks? Like, what about, what we have to reconcile, but no one really wants to think about is that the vast majority of the mathematics that we teach kids, they never use again because of the calculators they carry in their pockets. Mm-hmm. And so at the same time, there are all these skills that people really do need in real life and they don't have. And so it's hard to disentangle the nostalgia of what we're familiar with and what we've always taught from what do we actually need to be productive members of society. And that can lead to some really uncomfortable conversations that challenge people's assumptions about math.
Right. And then, when something like Common Core came around, that seemed to shake everybody up because it was just so different in terms of how math was taught. And I'm curious, how do you feel about that?
It's really interesting how political Common Core became, because it never really had a chance to really be about whether this is a good or bad thing. It was just, it's Big Brother doing this to you. And I think that the simplest way for me to kind of just explain, like you'll see these things. I mean, it's not so common now, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago, on Facebook, on some social media, you hear this, like people show like what math used to look like and what Common Core math looks like, and it would make Common Core look like clown math. Mm-hmm. But I want to just kind of unpack one example. So if you're listening right now, you don't need pencil and paper for this, but try to do this math problem. 99 plus 46. Now stop. Now, if you did this in the time I gave you, you probably used a method that was not one they taught you in school. You probably thought, well, 99 is basically 100. And so if I take away 1 from 46, I get 100 plus 45. We're done. Now, what you need to realize is that is not the way your teachers taught you. Your teachers taught you to put a 9 and a 9, and then under the 9 and 9, put a 4 and a 6. Then do 6 plus 9 is 15. Put the 1 on top of the other 9. 1 plus 9 is 10. Plus 4 is 14.
That's what I was doing. And I was like, wait, I didn't have a chance to do that.
And the thing that is important to realize here is if you're using pencil and paper, or if you're doing something like that, that method is really good. But that method is really hard to do in your head. Mm-hmm. And so our brains have this ability to hold tens and hundreds much more easily. And so what winds up happening is that there's a disconnect between how we think. Like if you were to write down what I said on paper that you took the 46 and turned it into a 1 and a 45 and then added 99 plus 1 and then added 100 plus the 45, it would look like the most ridiculous math, except for the fact that that is what your brain does because it's so much easier to make it work with 100. So I think that that's the problem, is that Common Core is really building upon the way people actually think and process and really helping build this conceptual understanding. And we're coming from our own experiences where we think, well, that's not the way I did it. So does that mean that the way I did it was bad? Or if it was good enough for me, shouldn't it be good enough for them? And it leads to really uncomfortable situations.
Can you conjecture as to why there's some recent reporting right now, it's November in 2019, that there haven't been any gains in math or English scores after how many years of Common Core?
Yeah, I mean, let's just be real. Teaching is complex. I mean, there are so many variables, right? Like you can't run a control. Like imagine if we could do this. Imagine if we could take, I don't know, 1 million children and take them away from their families and put them in some sort of shop where they have the exact same food and the exact same experiences. And the only thing different was one set of, 500,000 of them had one kind of standards, another one had Common Core. Well, then we could possibly measure things, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, other than that, it's just really hard to do it. Even each state has slightly different variations of Common Core standards.
True.
The reality is that teachers haven't had nearly enough training to understand the math that they're supposed to teach. There's so many factors in there. Also, here's the crazy thing about assessments. I'm going to say what everyone knows to be true, but no one really wants to think about, is that assessments don't measure what actually matters. Assessments measure what's measurable. So like if no one's going to doubt, like if I could tell you how much math any child knows, if you give me like half an hour and I can just sit and talk with them. But if you tell me I have to like use a multiple choice test to measure that same kid's understanding, gosh, it's going to be a crapshoot whether I can do a good job there. Right. So a lot of even assessments that we're using to measure whether things make a difference. It wasn't the same assessment that we were probably using 10 years ago. So there's just so many variables here. We want data, but it's just really hard to have clean data that is definitive.
And it's even hard to write a good test. Let's be honest with that, because even test makers, not all the tests turn out right. I remember in my professional learning community just trying to write a common formative assessment. And then when the kids take it, everyone bombed on number 5. Well, there's something wrong with number 5 then. So it's actually pretty complex to write a good test, let alone one that everyone's going to take and we can get a good measurement with it.
Yeah, totally. Just like, here's the simplest like open and shut argument. The people who wound up making the most popular Common Core test, the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, had millions of dollars and years to make an assessment. And this was the best they were able to do. Like if there was a better way, it would have happened, right? But just we're at a place where it's really hard to scale, to write an assessment that's scalable and can be graded in like a reasonable amount of time. And so, there's a really big gap between measuring what actually matters and what we're actually measuring right now.
Now, you came up with this idea of open middle math. I have never heard of it, but I know that my listeners, there are math teachers out there, and I'd love to have them learn about some different ideas in terms of teaching math. So can you explain what it is and how it benefits student learning?
Yeah, for sure. So let me first unpack the source of open middle.
Okay.
So a guy named Dan Meyer, who's a really well-known math teacher in his own right, was talking about making math more like video games. And he explained how video games have beginnings, middles, and ends. So if you think of, say, like Miss Pac-Man, right? You begin the same way, you're on the bottom, and at the end of every level, you get the dot or you get killed by the ghost. And that's the same. That's boring. What's interesting, though, is what happens in the middle, like which way you're going to go. Is it going to get a close call? Are you going to eat the fruit? Are you going to eat the ghost? And so some people say like, oh, I love open-ended problems, and open-ended problems could be good. But what really matters is having that open middle, right? And the same thing applies in math. A lot of times a person will have this idea of like a math problem where everyone begins with the same problem and everyone ends with the same answer. So in that way, the problem, it has a closed beginning and a closed ending. What's really matters, though, is that middle. having an open middle means that there are many strategies that you can use to solve it. And so you can have some really interesting conversations about like, wow, you solved, you added 5, 10 times and you got the answer. Another kid maybe multiplied by 5 times 10 and they got the answer. And this, I'm giving a very basic example here, but that kids can start to see the connection between different strategies. And so there are places for sure for open-ended problems, but a closed middle problem would be like, here's the problem, you get the answer, but you have to follow the steps that your teacher told you in your notes. And that's freaking boring and really just mind-numbing. So we've come up with, and so Open Middle, the website was co-founded by Nanette Johnson and I. And we created essentially a site where we house problems that have these kind of closed beginnings, open middles, and the endings may or not be open or closed, but they're problems that have very low floors that even like your struggling students can enter into it. But that they're really high ceilings and really challenging problems. You would think that kids that are really challenged would be, I don't want to do this. It's too hard. But the crazy thing, if you want to just get a quick testimonial, go on Twitter and look for the hashtag why open middle. So WHY open middle, one word. And you'll see teachers after teachers just talking about how these problems have been game changers, how the kids won't stop. They want their paper to continue working during recess, that they have never seen kids, having these conversations before. I am super biased, let me be clear, but I think that they are the single biggest bang for buck in math education. And that this is one of the easiest things to integrate into your classroom, and it has like a disproportionately big benefit.
Now, I went on the site and I saw a problem about chips, like a variety bag of chips. So do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, so that's not that. So I also have real world problems, and I can talk about that one too.
Okay.
That's a little bit different about open math. Do you want me open middle math?
Do one of each. How's that? Yeah.
So, it's hard to really do an open middle problem via voice. But what I will say is this: if you go to openmiddle.com, if you're like, okay, Robert, I'm intrigued, but I'm kind of skeptical. How do I get started? If you go to openmiddle.com, one word, what we've done is right in the very middle, we've put our favorite problem from every grade level from kindergarten through calculus. So if you click on that, it'll email you like our starter pack, and it'll have like your favorite problem. And I think that that'll give you a really good idea of how to begin. It comes with hints and answers and kind of why we love the problem. So I think that's a really good way to kind of get started if people are interested.
Does it also give like tips for the teachers, like where kids are going to stumble along the way?
So one thing that I think is worth kind of considering is that the vast majority of time that I screw up when I'm teaching a lesson, it happens when I didn't spend enough time anticipating how kids will solve it.
Right.
And someone could tell me how kids are going to solve it, but until I do the problem myself, it's really hard to know what it's going to go like, how it's going to go. And so we don't necessarily have like, this is what kids might do on open middle. We strongly suggest that you actually try to do the problem yourself. If you can't think of, like, if you get it right your first try, that's not so good, because I promise you kids are going to get stuck. And if you don't know where they're going to get stuck, that's a problem too. So I would say that if you took that problem that is in that email that gets emailed to you, you will find a problem that will blow your mind and will get you hooked and just thinking about what other opportunities there are for you to use those in your classroom. Now, would you give this as like a whole class activity and then pull kids to differentiate and do like small group lessons? I would say that like the simplest way to think about it is this. I think every one of us remembers a teacher telling us to do like page 65, 1 through 60 odd, or to do a worksheet. Maybe it had like a riddle at the bottom. Anytime you were going to do one of those, an open middle problem can replace that entire worksheet. I think that one of the things we say is that they are open middle problems are problems that can replace an entire worksheet. It's one of those things that's a little bit hard to describe if you haven't seen it, but if you check it out, you'll see like, wow, this is so much more fun, going to help build so much more conceptual understanding, give me X-ray vision about what kids know. And I think that you'll find that kids really love the struggle as well. And do you have lessons that align with standards? Yeah, so we have I think around 600 problems, somewhere around 200 for elementary, 200 for middle school, and 200 for high school. They're aligned to the Common Core standards, but I mean, it's not like, in Common Core they teach addition and in the other states they don't teach addition, right? So you might have to shift it to like a slightly different grade, but more or less, standards are taught in roughly the same grade. So you can find what you're looking for there. With open middle, you have to use a lot more strategic thinking, and you have to use conceptual understanding to really think about like what is the best way to solve this problem. Oftentimes they have blanks where you have to choose digits about like which digits, like for example, this one maybe is easy to understand, but maybe not. Imagine 2 blanks plus 2 blanks. And now you can pick the digits 1 to 9 to put a digit in each blank. There's 4 blanks now, to make the largest possible sum. All right. So like you might pick 1, 2 plus 3, 4, and that makes 12 plus 34. So that makes a sum, but is that the largest possible sum? Then kids will maybe think, okay, I want bigger numbers. And so they'll put like 9, 8 plus 7, 6. So great. You've picked the greatest possible digits, but is that the largest possible sum? And then they'll think, okay. And like my son, when he was in first grade, he picked 9, 8 plus 7, 6. But what he didn't realize is that you want more 10s than you want 1s. And if that 8 shouldn't be a 1's digit, that should be a 10's digit. And so, he could add 2-digit numbers all day and night, but he had gaps in his understanding of place value. And this problem helped kind of bring that to light and helped him develop deeper conceptual understanding about like, what do the digits mean? What do the places mean? And so problems like that, I don't know how well that came across visually, but hopefully that made a little sense.
I'm sure that made sense to your math teachers, especially. And then I'm still intrigued by this chip problem that I saw.
Yeah. So I have a fair amount of real world problems on my website, robertkaplinsky.com. That's KAPLINSKY.com. And with this particular problem, I will make the case that word problems don't exist in real life. And what I mean by that is that in real life, there's never like you and your 10 friends are buying pizza. Each person will eat 3 slices of pizza. A pizza parlor sells pizzas that have 8 slices. Like in real life, you have no freaking clue what information you have. You don't know if someone ate dinner or if they're coming with a friend. You have to figure out what information you need. In this particular one, I want you to imagine last time you were at like a Costco or a Target or even your grocery store, and they had those like Frito-Lay snack packs where they had like maybe 5 or 6 or more flavors in a package. And I want you, if you can visually remember, how did they figure out how many of each flavor to be? Like say it was maybe 5 flavors and 50 bags in a package. Were there 10 of each? And you may not remember now, but what you'll find is that it's almost never the same amount of each, right? It's like 12 of Fritos and 4 of Sun Chips because Sun Chips are awful. And then like 16 of the Cheetos. And so you're like, I mean, one day it just occurred to me like, how the hell does anyone decide what to put on there? Like, I mean, the reality is if they put the wrong number, they're going to make a lot less money, right? And when you start to unpack it, it gets really complicated. Like the easy answer is, okay, they put more of the ones that are popular. All right. But let me push this back on you. If you want to make a lot of money and you know which ones are popular, do you put more of those chips because that's what people want? Or do you put less because they don't have to buy more bags?
Oh, yeah.
Like the more you start to unpack it, the more you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything. Like, do they vary it based on like how much they cost to make? Do they make different packages for different regions? And so I have this up there because in real life, this is not a word problem. This is it's a real context, but in real life, they don't tell you everything that you need to know. You have to figure out what's useful. Like some lady's job at Frito-Lay is to figure out what numbers to put on those bags. And she is not getting paid enough. I don't know who you are, but you're not getting paid enough because the choices she makes and having to figure out what data is important and what's not. Like, does it matter their gender? Does it matter who's buying it? And who do you survey? Do surveys even matter? I mean, I think that these problems where they're somewhat defined, but in a sense, you kind of know what you need to do. You need to figure out the numbers to put in the bags, but how you approach it, it's really unclear. And I think that would really resemble what life is actually like.
That's such a exciting way to look at that math problem, though, because the kids don't think about those external factors. And when you bring them in, they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. And I think what you had suggested in there was to like poll the class.
Yeah, I mean, even that would be interesting, right? Imagine polling the class and then using that data to kind of have percentages of what the class would like. And then having their minds explode when they poll, let's say, the broader school population and realize that they don't get the same percentages. And now that they have no idea which one is actually a better choice, right? And I mean, I think it's just really interesting because I think sometimes we want to wrap up math with like a bow and make it nice and pretty and have all the numbers work out. But in real life, it's not that way, and it's hard to know. Like, legitimately, I wouldn't know if it would be wiser for a school to do like the whole school student body or one class, or it's hard to know.
And what a more exciting way to learn math. And I think about all the different, concepts that you're wrapped into just that one problem, and now you're using both math and English language arts together, and some science and some statistics. So I feel like that would have gotten me more engaged when I was taking math in school. Yeah.
I mean, Tracy Zager has this book, and the title is perfect for what my life mission. Her book is called Becoming the Math Teacher You Wish You Had. Mm-hmm. And damn, I want to be that math teacher. Like, I'm trying to help kids not have to go through what I went through. And really, I'd be shocked to find many of your listeners who are thinking, no, my math situation was perfect. Like, every one of us probably had a moment where like, this is just not working for me. And I think that is the fire that I keep pulling from when I'm wondering why I do what I do.
Now, in my class, right, as an English teacher, my kids come in at completely different reading levels. And even though I teach 7th grade, I have kids reading at 3rd grade level and some of them reading at 8th grade. How do you, in a classroom for math, differentiate so that you're reaching all the students at their different levels as well?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie and say like I've ever figured this out perfectly, right? Like, no teacher in the world has a perfect solution for meeting every child's needs, right?
Right.
Some kids, we often focus on the ones who are struggling and bringing up to grade level, but we also have kids who probably could go so much farther, but they're told to like, I don't know, do more problems or help the next kid.
Right.
I will say, and again, I'm biased. I mean, so I'll say two things here that I think one's going to make people feel more uncomfortable. I think sometimes we spend too much on foundational skills. Like, for example, and I wonder what if we use more tools like calculators and let kids use calculators, because like, for example, if kids want to find out or need to find out how much sales tax they'll be charged or how much a 20% off coupon will save them, and they're struggling with, say, multiplication or maybe decimal multiplication, they're kind of screwed. Like, it doesn't matter if they could actually understand the concepts of markup and discount and stuff like that. They can't do multiplication, then they're dead. And they're just never going to get caught up. But the reality in real life is, like, if I have to add more than like a single digit number plus a single digit number, I am probably going to use a calculator, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just going to be honest. Like, yeah. I almost use a calculator, but yet somehow we think like it's like real mathematicians don't use calculators. I really think that if kids are really struggling in math, I don't have that big of a problem letting you use a calculator unless the thing you're actually trying to teach them is the computation. Like, if you're trying to teach them how to multiply, then don't use a calculator maybe. But if you're trying to teach them something and a requisite is multiplication, like, who are we killing? Like, who's dying here if they use a calculator? They're going to use a calculator in real life anyway. I think it's like a hill that's not meant for us to die on. The other thing I'll say that's less of a maybe a fire starter is, honestly, I think open middle problems are great at differentiating. I just actually wrote a book called Open Middle Math Problems That Unlock Student Thinking. And in the book, I really talk about like all of those aspects of like, how do you choose a problem so that the kids are ready for it? And then, what do you do when kids are struggling, and how do you differentiate, and how do you, like, for example, sometimes when kids are really, really struggling, you can have conversations about like, my favorite mistake. Like if every kid got the wrong answer, you could talk about which wrong answer helped dispel the biggest misconceptions, right? So you can spin it so that you're addressing the issues that you need to. And that's kind of one of the things I talk about in the book. So I will never say I've got it all figured out. It's something that every teacher will always struggle with. But those are some ideas that I think about a lot.
And maybe you struggle with this next part that I was thinking too, because I certainly struggle with this. But what's a fair way to grade math?
I think this is a really big kind of question to unpack. I think fair is an important question to like define what fairness means. I think also even thinking what is the purpose of a grade matters. Mm-hmm. Like let's start with formative versus summative assessment. My absolute favorite metaphor for unpacking those comes from Bob Steak, and he says something, I might be butchering it a lot, but when the chef tastes the soup, that's formative. When the customer tastes the soup, that's summative.
Okay.
And I love it, right? Because when the chef tastes the soup, they're not eating. They're just like, do I need to add more salt or more garlic or more pepper, right? When the customer tastes the soup, it's donezo. Like there is nothing else happening. It is what it is. And I guess one question I have is like a lot of times we like are grades summative or formative, right? Because a lot of times we'll say like, this is the grade that you got and that's the final grade and you can't change it, right? But if grade's supposed to be a measure of what kids know, like one thing that I used to do when I was in the classroom was I allowed kids to retake tests an unlimited number of times. And at first that idea blew my mind, like this is an awful idea. But then I started thinking to myself, like, what the hell is the point of teaching anyway? Like, am I trying to just teach them that you sucked this day and you're never going to get better? Like, if the real job is to get them caught up and really understanding, and the kid cares enough to go back and learn those ideas and then actually retest and show that they improved, then why the hell are we not doing that? Was it a hell of a lot more work for me? Yes, I was after school a lot of days grading tests. But I mean, I just want to kind of just think about that. Like, if the grade is supposed to be an accurate measure of what they know, then, I mean, just it starts to make you unpack a lot of things. Like, how much should homework really be part of the grade, and how much should effort and classroom participation? Should it be all tests? Should it be none tests? And then what does fair mean? I mean, just there's just a lot to unpack there, right? Like a traditional, I mean, traditionally it's been about like how fast can you get the right answers to a problem, right? But I just think that it's really worth it. Sometimes grades become almost punitive. Sometimes we use like multiple choice assessments where, kids know something, but maybe they don't understand. Like a multiple choice is not like, gosh, I mean, if you wanted to show how well you knew something, I don't think multiple choice would be the best way of doing it. I think if you could explain yourself to be better, but I'm trying to be realistic. There's not enough time to do it every single way. So I don't know if that's the most direct answer, but those are some of the things I think about when I'm trying to figure out how to actually grade and what a grade actually even represents.
Well, and you're speaking my language here, because I do think that a lot of teachers use grading punitively. They want to get back at the student who's not putting in any effort, the student who doesn't do all of the classwork yet aces the tests. And it makes me wonder, if a student doesn't turn in their classwork on time, or maybe they're missing a few assignments, or maybe they came in and they weren't performing so well on a test, but later on they're totally acing that particular skill. Do we average it? Because if we average it, then we are taking their past mistakes and, adding it up with their present, even though they have mastered it. Should I punish them for not knowing it before?
Yeah. I mean, consider this also, right? Like, so I'm not saying that I'll say something that everyone will agree with, but like, consider this. What happens next year, right? Let's say you teach 5th grade and you've got a kid who comes in with a C, but the kid the next year rocks every single test. Well, maybe they got the C because they did well in the test but did no homework, right? But the teacher's like, why did the kid get a C, right? I think that the next year's teacher thinks that letter grade is a measure of how much that kid knows, right? But that's not always what's happening here. And I mean, I think just other things to consider is like everything from how much should a fail be? Like, we have these weird arbitrary grading systems that if you think about make no sense. Like, for example, in most classes, like an A is like 100 to 90, and then, B is 90 to 80 or something like,
right.
Give or take, et cetera, et cetera. But then when we think about a grade point average, an A is 4, a B is 3. And so when you do A is 4, that's really A is 100 to 75, and a B is 75 to 50.
Right.
And so how the hell are both of those okay, right? And so I think people don't think enough about how freaking arbitrary everything we do. Like, we think that this is the way it has to be, the way it's always done. But a lot of it's really much more arbitrary. And honestly, if you take a step back from screw everything, the only thing that matters is kids. And the only thing that matters is that they actually learn this. No one will care about the grade they got when they're old. The only thing that matters is, did they learn that? And if you can find a way for them to learn it by giving them another chance to retake the test, why the hell are we not doing that? So that's how I center myself.
Yeah. And it's a contentious issue. I don't know if you've noticed when talking about grades with other teachers are very weird about how secretive they are with their grades. They don't necessarily want you to see their grade book. They don't want to talk about it because it can be very divisive and controversial.
Oh, for sure. Some people think this guy's an idiot. Like, why is this Robert guy even on your show? I get it. I'm not saying that you have to agree with me, but I sure as hell hope you all agree with me that the only thing that matters is kids and them learning. And if that's really what our centering thing is, then everything should fall from there.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope everyone believes.
Now, when you speak at conferences and events, I'm sure you run into some new teachers too, but I'm assuming it's mainly math teachers?
Correct.
And so what's like weighing on their minds right now in terms of like teaching math? What are they talking about and pontificating about?
Honestly, it's freaking hard to be a teacher. Like, I don't think anyone really appreciates that hasn't actually tried to teach for a reasonable amount of time, because everyone's like tutored one person and helped them do math, and they think, oh, or whatever, English. I've helped a kid write a sentence. I could be an English teacher. And it's not until you've actually done it that you realize how hard it is. And I think that really the issues that people are just trying to figure out are really just, how do we survive? How do we, what should we be teaching our kids? What curriculum should we be using? We're in this weird time where we are blessed because we've never had more resources than we have now. And we're also cursed because we've never had more resources than we have now. Mm-hmm. Like, what the hell do you pick? Like, how do you know which one's good? And I would say that you could have, here's the crazy thing. If I could somehow bring down a sheet of paper that had everything you will need to be the best teacher for the rest of your life, it's not like you're going to be able to implement all that tomorrow. And maybe not the next day, and maybe not the next month, and maybe not even years. And the reality is just that I probably need 2 days off per week just to be prepared to teach the other 3 days adequately. And I think just what's weighing on their minds is just, how do I make this actually work? Like, everything that I hear is great in theory, but I need time to process this. I was part of a 3-year grant at my school district, Downey Unified School District in California. And we provided math teachers with 64 hours, 8 days at 8 hours a day of training to deeply understand their math standards one summer, then the next summer, and the next summer. So 3 years in a row of 64 hours each year. Imagine doing 8 full days of PD 3 years in a row. And the only thing they left with is, oh, damn, we need so much more. Like, the takeaway was that the more they learned, the more they realized how much they still have to learn. And damn, if that's not the story of my life. Like, the more I learn, the more I realize just how much is there. And so I think that's really what people are talking about, is that we just need more hours and days in a week. And it's just hard to make it all work.
Now, you mentioned your book, and I really think that this could be a good way for my listeners to learn more about open middle math in addition to your website. So where can they get their hands on that book? Thank
you. Yeah. So if you go to openmiddle.com, there's a link in the top right that says get the open middle book. So open middle math, the book is basically, if you're interested in these ideas, but you're like, how do I do this? It takes you through the whole process, including why you'd even want to, what makes these problems different, How do you pick a problem? How do you prepare to use the problem? What happens if things don't go as you planned? How do you make more or find more? And really, it takes you to this whole process like I was kind of sitting with you in a staff lounge, just chatting with you. And so I designed it to be the shortest possible book I could write. And I don't mean that in a joking way. Like, there's no teachers who are like, I wish this PD book was longer. Like, I made it the absolute shortest I can make, cut out all the fluff. And so it's really just jam-packed with actionable ideas that you can use right away.
So it sounds like it accompanies your website really well, since your website is the repository of those problems, and this is explaining the how-to.
Yeah, I mean, we've had these problems. So the problems, if you just want problems, go to openmiddle.com. They're all free. Take them, have fun. But one of the feedback I got was just like, I need more support in actually implementing them. And so that's what this book is. When you've used them enough to know that you want to get better at using them, then this is the book you want to check out. And really, if you just want to use them to feel comfortable before you start to experiment, it's also the book. Whether you're a veteran or new to it, you'll find that you'll get a lot of value out of it.
Perfect. And where can my listeners find you if they want to pick your brain and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you. So you've heard about openmiddle.com. My website is robertkaplinsky.com, Kaplinsky. I'm on social media at Robert Kaplinsky on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. And really, I just love to connect with you, hear what you're talking about. If you're into mathematics, especially, I'd love to talk to you. But just, yeah, I very much remember how hard it was to survive my first years of teaching. And so I have great empathy with what you're going through.
Well, thank you so much. And I know that they're going to get so much from this episode. I mean, I'm not even a math teacher, but you just bring so much honesty and candor to the conversation. And I know they're going to really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Now, I loved this conversation with Robert because he's so real and raw and really gets to the issues that a lot of people don't want to talk about. So here are my key takeaways from the conversation. First, everyone has things that they don't understand as well as they'd like. I know that seems obvious, but this really stood out to me because it got to the heart of content knowledge versus pedagogy. So even if I had a bachelor's or a master's in my subject area, it doesn't mean that I necessarily know how to break it down for a sixth grader. And if I excelled in my subject when I was that sixth grader, then I'll never truly understand what they were struggling with. So yes, we may know everything we need to know about math or Spanish or science, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we know how to make it relatable and understandable for our students. Robert discussed that Common Core math builds upon the way that people actually think about math, and there was pushback because it's not how we as teachers were taught math when we were younger. While I personally struggled to see the point of Common Core math when I was helping my daughter with her homework, I did understand that it presented alternative ways of solving math, and having that choice is actually really good for kids. He discussed open middle math, and it's kind of like this choose your own adventure story in terms of how to solve a math problem. Students are encouraged to explore different strategies to solve a problem so that they can see the connection between those different strategies. This is opposed to just being taught and forced to solve a problem one certain way. And Robert and his co-founder, Nanette Johnson, have created a huge repository of engaging and standards-aligned open middle math problems for every grade. Finally, no matter what our preconceived notions were about teaching before we got into the game, we all know that teaching is hard. There's too much to teach, too many resources available, and not enough time to do the job as well as we want. And when Robert and I discussed this, I really took to heart to this, and I really thought about you guys. We need more time to absorb everything and process it. And I honestly think that the only way to really do that and to get everything done is to just be patient with ourselves, constantly reflect, and try to make small improvements every year. Luckily, there are resources such as this podcast to help you make sense of the basic teaching part so that you can focus more on the subject matter part. Now, if you want to learn more about Open Middle Math, be sure to head over to openmiddle.com. And don't forget about his book that takes you through the process of teaching open middle math problems. If you want some really fun real-world math problems, you can go to robertkaplinsky.com, and you can connect with him on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Robert Kaplinsky. And you guys, I know you don't have pen and paper right now, so those links are going to be in the show notes. Now, if you loved this episode or some of the previous ones that you've listened to, please share it with your teacher friends so that they can also benefit from everything that you're learning. Thanks again for hanging out with me today, you guys. Have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.